In the autumn of 1480, on the banks of the Ugra River, two armies faced off, Muscovy under Ivan III and the great horde led by Akhmat Khan. For weeks they stared across the icy water, neither side daring to attack. This was not a battle of swords, but a test of endurance. For over 2 centuries, Russian lands had paid tribute to the Mongol Golden Horde. Ivan III refused to pay, openly defying the Khan. The soldiers on the Ugra weren't just defending a border, they were fighting for independence. Eventually, the horde turned and left, not defeated in battle, but worn down by circumstance. Ivan's victory was one of resilience, not aggression. The Ugra standoff ended Mongol domination and marked the birth of a new Russian state. Sometimes, history's most decisive moments are the quietest. To understand the Ugra standoff, we must look back to 1237, when Mongol armies swept across the Russian plains. The Kievan Ruses fell, cities burned, and the Mongol yoke began, a period of tribute and humiliation lasting over 2 centuries. The Golden Horde ruled from afar, demanding heavy taxes and submission. Russian princes became vassals, forced to travel to Sarai for the Khan's approval. The Mongol system centralized power, shaping Russian governance into a more autocratic model. Yet the yoke also brought stability and new trade routes, even as it isolated Russia from Western Europe. The burden of tribute and the memory of invasion fueled a deep desire for liberation. Over generations, resentment simmered, waiting for a leader bold enough to defy the horde. The Mongol yoke was more than oppression. It was a crucible that forged a new Russian identity. By the late 15th century, that identity was ready to break free. Ivan III, Grand Prince of Moscow, emerged as the leader who would challenge the horde. He was no flamboyant warrior, but a patient, ruthless strategist. Ivan's mission: unite the fractured Russian principalities. Through diplomacy, marriage, and force, he absorbed rival lands, most notably Novgorod. This consolidation gave Moscow the strength to resist the horde. Ivan saw the horde's weakness, fractured by internal strife and rival Khans. He exploited these divisions, forming alliances and playing enemies against each other. In 1476, Ivan stopped paying tribute, a direct act of rebellion. Akhmat Khan had to respond or lose his authority. Ivan's years of preparation, unifying lands, building resources, and waiting for the right moment, set the stage for confrontation. The standoff at the Ugra was not a gamble, but the result of meticulous planning. Ivan was not just a prince, he was a nation-builder, laying the foundation for a sovereign Russia. The time for defiance had come. In 1480, Akhmat Khan marched north, seeking to punish Ivan. Ivan's spies tracked the horde's movements, and he responded with caution. Russian forces secured the Ugra River, a natural barrier, while Ivan shored up support in Moscow. When Akhmat found the Ugra defended, he moved west to the Ugra, hoping for Lithuanian support. The Muscovite army anticipated this, blocking the crossing. Skirmishes erupted, but the Russians held the high ground. The river's width and current made a full-scale assault impossible. Weeks passed in stalemate. Neither side could break the deadlock. The conflict shifted from battle to a test of endurance and supply. Ivan refused to risk open battle, relying on defense and patience. The fate of Russia now rested on who could outlast the other on the frozen banks of the Ugra. As October turned to November, winter became the true enemy. Muscovite soldiers on home ground endured the cold with makeshift shelters and meager rations. Sickness and hunger spread, but supply lines from nearby towns kept them going. For the horde, the situation was dire. No plunder, weak supply lines, and starving horses. The Mongol cavalry, once unstoppable, was crippled by lack of fodder. The Lithuanian allies never arrived, leaving Akhmat isolated. The Russian winter, relentless and unforgiving, became Ivan's greatest ally. Morale in the horde's camp collapsed as food and fuel ran out. The standoff had become a siege, with winter as the besieger. Ivan's patience and the harsh climate slowly dismantled the enemy. The Muscovites endured, knowing survival meant victory. The horde, far from home and hope, began to break. The cold was the weapon that would decide the fate of empires. By late October, the Ugra River began to freeze. The ice threatened to erase the Russians' defensive advantage. Akhmat Khan saw his chance. A frozen river could be crossed by cavalry. Ivan faced a choice: fight on the ice or withdraw. True to form, Ivan pulled his army back to Kremenets, refusing to risk everything in a single battle. This was not retreat, but a tactical repositioning. Ivan forced the horde to attack on his terms, not theirs. The Russian army withdrew in good order, ready for whatever came next. The frozen river was now open, but the Russians were prepared. All eyes turned to Akhmat Khan. Would he seize the moment or falter? The final act of the standoff was about to begin. The fate of Russia hung in the balance. The ice was thick, the way clear, but Akhmat Khan did not attack. His army, weakened and demoralized, could not mount a charge. Lithuanian allies had failed him, and the Russian winter closed in. Even victory at Kremenets would leave his army too depleted to threaten Moscow. On November 11th, scouts reported the unthinkable. The horde was retreating. Ivan's army held position, wary of a trap, but soon it was clear. The Mongols were gone. The confrontation ended not with a battle, but with the quiet retreat of the once mighty horde. Russian soldiers watched in stunned relief as their enemy vanished into the snow. Endurance had triumphed over force. The Mongol yoke, centuries old, was broken in silence. Ivan's patience and the Russian winter had won the day. The shadow of the horde lifted at last. A new era for Russia had begun. The Ugra standoff marked the end of Mongol rule and the birth of a sovereign Russia. Ivan III returned to Moscow, not as a conqueror but as the architect of liberation. Moscow's primacy was secured, and the gathering of Russian lands could continue unopposed. The victory at Ugra became a cornerstone of Russian identity, proof that endurance and patience could defeat any foe. The Russian winter, once a curse, was now a symbol of resilience. Ivan's strategy, caution, preparation, and psychological warfare became a model for future leaders. The standoff showed that sometimes refusing to act is the boldest move. Today, the Ugra is quiet, but its legacy is immense. Russia's freedom was won not by a single blow, but by standing firm until the oppressor crumbled. The silent victory at Ugra echoes through Russian history.